I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, one of the world's top orchestrators and arrangers in Broadway and Hollywood, Michael Starobin. On the stage, he's been involved in some of the most acclaimed productions of all time, including Sunday in the Park with George, Rags, Birds of Paradise, Falsettos, My Favorite Year, A New Brain, Assassins, which won the 2004 Tony Award for Best Orchestration, Next to Normal, which won the 2009 Tony Award for Best Orchestrations, and Queen of the Mist, and many more. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I was listening to an interview, and you said that orchestrators tend to know all the other orchestrators, and you guys help each other out all the time.
Yeah, it's true because especially for theater orchestration, the work comes in at the last minute when the final rehearsals start. You would think you'd be doing it all along for years along with the composer composing the songs, but no, it's a production-oriented process. So it's only in those last 4 weeks of rehearsal when they actually have the actors who are going to perform and they set the keys with them and they start to put in music for the set to move, for dance breaks. None of that occurs till the final 4 weeks. So you really have 4 weeks to orchestrate a show, and sometimes they don't have music ready for you till the end of the first week, so that makes it 3 weeks. And when those kind of situations arise, you turn to your friends, some of whom you compete against to get these jobs, and you help each other out. And it's a wonderful community, small community of theater orchestrators, in that we all turn to each other for that help.
You mentioned that you fell in love with the theater by doing rather than really listening to records and that kind of thing. You were really involved from high school and onwards in a lot of productions, and that really galvanized you and got you excited about the art form. Maybe if we could go even before then, how did you get started in music?
Well, it's incorrect to say I didn't listen. What I didn't listen to a lot of was theater, but I was always listening to music, always studying music. I had classical piano lessons from the time I was about 6 or 7. And while I'm not a great pianist, my teacher was an excellent theory teacher. And so I got a lot of my music theory way before high school and college.
Michael, if you don't mind me asking, what age did you really start?
About 6 or 7. Or 7 or 8. Probably I would say 7 years old. And my dad was a classical music lover, and so I was exposed to a lot of classical music. And growing up in the 60s, I was exposed. I had a brother who's 5 years older who was a classical guitarist. But he exposed me to a lot of the rock and roll going on at the time. So like 8 years old, I was hearing things like Jimi Hendrix, Cream, a lot of the music of that period. So I grew up really on classical music and rock and roll, and came to theater music only in the process of actually doing musicals in high school and not falling in love with it as an art form until I actually started working in it and working with it with professionals in it and discovering it at that point. But my background in music is not jazz, is not commercial swing, is not any of the things that Broadway is really descended from. So I sort of bring my own quirky angle to the work I do in the theater.
And I'm so curious about this teacher that taught you theory. How did he explain theory to you? And that's so wonderful because that he taught you how music worked.
His name was Avram Sternklar, Israeli-born concert pianist. I believe he's still alive. And he taught me with workbooks of theory so that I was advancing through it pretty quickly. And so our theory studies just kept advancing. I think he stressed that more because he realized I would never practice enough to become a great pianist. But that was okay. I mean, I got a lot out of it anyway.
So, Michael, do you have perfect pitch? Were you do your ears, or do you have strong relative pitch?
No, I do not have perfect pitch. I have very weak relative pitch. I can hear when things are out of tune, but not great. I think my ears are more attuned to color and what I call shape, like melodic shapes, which I hear less with pitch than, more the shape and strength and direction. It's hard to describe how one hears and imagines things in abstract musical sense without pitch. I think I've leaned on my weakness of my ear to strengthen my perception of melodic shape as something that pitch doesn't tie me down. So I know what the line's going to be shaped like and feel like, and what the line is going to do for me in an orchestration. And then I find the pitches next, as opposed to being locked down to a series of pitches immediately, which often are imitating something else.
And you also it's so cool that you're a rock and roll bass player too. You played bass. Was that growing up in bands?
Yes, because I couldn't afford a keyboard. The keyboard of choice at my time was a Farfisa organ in those mid-'60s, and I lusted after it but could never afford it. This was definitely pre-synthesizer, way pre-MIDI, because this was the 60s. And so I learned to play bass because I was also playing bass in the school orchestra. I had started on flute and band and gotten bored and switched to tuba. And so I was playing tuba in the band and just sort of taught myself how to play string bass, badly, I might say, to be in the orchestra. And so quickly followed that I started playing electric bass in bands with friends.
If you don't mind me asking, what kind of music? Were you guys writing originals? Were you doing covers?
We weren't writing originals. We all wanted to do Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Right.
Because this was getting to be the late 60s, but we didn't have enough horn players. It was whatever we could do, whatever we could cover. I had a good friend who was a wonderful songwriter, girl who goes now by the name of Margot Random, lives in England, and she was a wonderful songwriter, and we had a couple of bands together. And we did some of her songs, and we did some covers, playing for kids' parties and things, kids our own age. We had a great time doing it.
Also, in high school, you began to get the theater bug and started working. Mm-hmm. Were you acting in them, or were you doing production?
No, I was never acting. I did a little production work at first, but then I quickly started doing music for them. Actually doing my first orchestration in 10th grade, which would be about 14 years old, for a little musical that no one had ever heard of, that we rented, but they wouldn't rent us orchestral parts. So I did my own little 6-piece orchestration for it, which we performed. And it was called Archie and Mehitabel, based on a very unknown comic.
That's great. And so were you doing a lot of that then? So once you started, did you keep going and keep going?
I kept experimenting with it. And then when I got to college, there were all sorts of projects doing music for different theatrical productions. So I never thought I was going to go into the theater. I thought when I went to college, I was training to be a classical composer. I thought I would go to graduate school and become a teacher somewhere and compose symphonies. But all the time I was, without realizing it, training myself to be a theater musician by doing theater music constantly and loving it. And I got to New York and by accident hooked up with a wonderful composer named William Finn. William Finn wrote March of the Falsettos, In Trousers. And we hooked up, and those were my first shows in New York. And they were also the beginning of off-Broadway musicals, which was, off-Broadway was never really a place musicals were developed. They were only fully developed for Broadway. And so it became a medium of creating these small shows with 5 or 6 actors, 5 or 6 pieces in the band. And March of the Falsettos was one of the first of those. And it started generating a whole new stream of writers and smaller scaled pieces to go to Broadway. And that really started in the early 80s.
When you started working there, How did you get a sense of the scene at the time? Let's say when you were extremely green on the scene, you happened to work with William Finn, who is just a wonderful composer. What would have happened if you didn't meet a William Finn in that situation?
I would have probably gotten work as a keyboard, as a pianist, coaching singers and maybe playing a cabaret or two. And I would have tried to work up to subbing on a Broadway show, but I wasn't a good enough pianist, so that probably would not have happened for me. But there was, as I said, there was this new scene of doing smaller shows, and there was no one there teaching me how to orchestrate, no one there teaching me how to music direct. So I just started doing it the way I do it and learning by making mistakes and doing small projects, usually for very little money, and working at things called record stores and CD stores,
right,
which are unheard of nowadays.
Yes, that's right.
And getting jobs at those to make money in between the plays that I would work on for no money. And eventually found enough work and learned enough to know what I was doing to keep moving forward. Part of my career is the huge fortune of meeting Bill Finn, who led me to James Lapine, who led me to Stephen Sondheim. But part of it was also the hard work, teaching myself, which let me be different than other people, because no one was telling me, oh, this is how you orchestrate for the theater. Oh, no, this is how you do. So I was finding my own ways to do things. Eventually, I did have to learn the traditional way to do things as well, when I would do a more traditional show. And by that point, I was working with people like Danny Trube, who, from looking at their work, learned the other way of doing things, not ass backwards, but straightforward, because it was coming from a tradition more.
I'm so curious about the self-learning that you did. That's so wonderful that you had that drive and that fire, and you did it all on your own, and then you went back and even supplemented your training. So how did you do it? Like, what scores were you looking at? Did you have a mentor? What was going on in your in your development at that stage?
I had no mentor for those first 10 years or so at all. It was really self-taught. But what I looked at were classical scores. I mean, I'm a Mahlerite, so I knew a lot of the Mahler symphonies very well. When I did a show like Sunday in the Park, I would look at Debussy's writing, but I would sort of make it up as I go along and try out combinations that were not usual, because those were the only instruments I had. And so there were. How do you teach yourself? You discover what doesn't work, and you fix it. And you discover what does work, and you use it again, but not too often. And you collect chops, and then you try to step back from your chops and go, why does this work? What is the underlying concept that makes this kind of writing work? So I don't just blindly imitate myself over and over, but understand, oh, this kind of counterpoint works better against a vocal because it has these qualities. So I'm not repeating the same line, but I'm understanding the nature of the line that I'm writing, so I can continue to write new lines and know that they will work because they're not too distracting from the vocal melody.
Now, I want to touch upon one thing that was very interesting that you said. You, in an interview, you said arranging versus orchestrating. Some people mix the two up and they use the terms interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. And could you actually elaborate on that?
Sure. It's easier to define arranging by saying what orchestration is, and that arranging is everything else. Orchestration is literally choosing what instruments play the notes. That's it. I mean, I have a piano part, and if I take the notes of the piano part and simply plug them into instruments, I haven't done any arranging. I've just simply orchestrated the piano part. However, what a piano composer writes for the piano usually doesn't fit the violin, usually doesn't fit whatever instruments you have. So you need to alter your material. All the alteration of compositional material that does not involve picking an instrument is arranging. So again, you take a piano part and you say, well, I'm going to alter this figure a little bit so strings can play it. That alteration is arranging. I'm going to take this vocal melody and write 4-part harmony for the chorus to sing with it. That's vocal arranging. I am going to take the themes of the music and create all new music to go in the middle for dancing. That's dance arranging. Now, does dance arranging start to approach composing? Absolutely. The line between composing and arranging is very vague. When I go to write a dance break, I am manipulating the composer's themes. I am writing new music that's not even in the song. I am doing all sorts of things. That's really a compositional process based on the song the composer has written. So arranging is a vague sort of form of composition, either to prepare it for instruments, to add vocals, to do dance music, or just to a director comes to you and say, I like the song that the composer wrote, but I'd like the first verse to be more, freely sung and lighter, and then the groove to start in the second 8. So the music director then goes and rearranges that first 8 to fit the director's concept without the composer in the room sometimes. So that kind of work is all arranging.
It sounds like a tremendous amount of work, especially when you have a 4-week deadline. It seems like there's so many things you're doing.
Well, a lot of those jobs are different people. A vocal arranger is usually the music director or a separate person. The dance arranger is a specialist who does that. All their work comes to me and I have to orchestrate it and then do a little bit of what I call orchestral arranging to make it fit instruments. For instance, on a big swing break, the pianist will just write big block chords with his hands hitting hard. The voicing has nothing to do with the 2 trumpets and 1 bone and 3 saxes that I have. So I have to really completely change his voicing, sometimes change the note on the top, which changes his melodic figure. Sometimes I will change a key for a dance break without, and then find a way to get back to the original key for when the voice comes back in, because I have to find a way to make it fit the instruments. And sometimes the range is completely wrong to have the brass shouting if it's a loud thing. So there's all sorts of in the theater, it's a music department. We're all working together to make a score work. The composer's at the top and in charge, but that composer sometimes has experience, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes he's an orchestrator. I work with Tom Kitt, who's an orchestrator himself, and sometimes we co-orchestrate the shows. Sometimes he wants me to just orchestrate it because he's leaning on my skills, which go in a different direction than his. And many of his shows, he orchestrates himself because he's leaning on where his skill set is, which is different than mine. So there's a whole department of musicians in the theater, which is one of the things that makes it exciting. And a big difference from film work is that we're all in the room with the director, with the writers, creating the piece at the same time. Music departments in film are all post-production, except for musical films where they will record the songs beforehand to be able to sing to them. But we're not post-production in the theater, we're production. So we're all in the room with designers, directors, actors, all putting it together at the same time, which is something I find much more exciting than film work. Film work's wonderful. You get to work with large orchestras. You get to work with epic-sized stories, which the theater is not about huge size, but film can be, and that can be exciting in its own world.
I wanted to ask you about, so obviously musical theater has a very rich history of its own. You said you looked to some classical scores. Did you ever look at some of the scores from musical theater itself?
I do, particularly the people I've worked with, like, as I mentioned, Danny Trube, Doug Besterman. I've gotten to know Jonathan Tunick and I've looked at his scores. And there are always things to learn from looking at those scores. Me personally, I get more out of classical scores. That's just the nature of where my head goes. But there's certainly voicings and approaches to things that some of those people, other great orchestrators, Larry Hochman, Bruce Coughlin, that where I will look at their work and go, I could be doing this sometime. A lot of that I used to music direct, and one of the great experiences for me was music directing an early revival of Merrily We Roll Along, which Jonathan Tunick orchestrated, and getting to look and study his scores while I conducted them every night was a real education.
Would it be fair to say that the musical theater, I guess, in the first half of the 19th century was very jazz influenced, also classical influenced, and then there's more of, then in the second half we had more introduction of the rock and roll element and other elements seeping in? Is that a perspective that is valid?
Yeah, I think you mean 20th century, not 19th century.
Oh. Yes, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, Broadway's always usually about 5 to 10 years behind where music is, trying to fold it in. Here's the thing about Broadway. Unlike opera, it's a commercial art form. It is about sales, and it's about people buying tickets. It's unlike opera, which is about, government commissions, government support. There are ticket sales, but opera is more based upon a repertoire that's already written and being brought back, with a small percentage of it being new work. Broadway is based on new work that's turning over quickly because it's commercial. And what commercial means is, one, you have to appeal to a broader audience than art music does, but you have to also appeal to the audience with good work, because they're not going to go to something that's bad. You can advertise and push something that's not bad, but after a while it won't work. So Broadway naturally follows the trends of music and goes where they're going. And so when swing was big in the 30s and 40s, in the 40s and 50s, swing music was the center of Broadway. Early pop started getting into the 60s and 70s, with a few rock and roll musicals like Hair. And so, but Broadway's always behind because Broadway's not a music trendsetter. There are completely original writers in it who are creative and trendsetters in themselves, but Broadway no longer, as in the days of Rodgers and Hammerstein, no longer generates hit records and hit songs, with the exception recently of Hamilton, which is a phenomenon unlike the theater, and I'm not sure we're going to see something like it again in terms of it crossing over into commercial into the charts in general. So yes, Broadway has now taken hip hop into itself as a style. I think part of the phenomenon with Hamilton, it was that it was the first show to really do that, in addition to just being great writing. And so that's caused that phenomenon. Now, of course, the moment you have, one show with hip hop, everyone's trying to do shows with hip hop, and some will be good and some won't, because that's now a trend. And it really comes down to not whether the show is hip hop or not. It comes down to whether the show is well written dramatically, because shows need to be great plays as well as having great scores. And that's a hard thing to accomplish. You just have to look at the track record of some of the great pop and rock songwriters who've attempted to do musicals and have fallen because they assumed this medium was exactly the same as every other medium, and they would just do it the way they do things because they're already recognized.
It sounds terrifying, Michael, because there's so many moving parts as you were talking about, and you can't. It sounds like you must really know your stuff if you want to jump into the game.
You really do. You have to study musicals. You need to study the shows of Stephen Sondheim, of Rodgers and Hammerstein, not to sound like them, but to understand the structure of how stories are told through lyrics in a musical. The big difference between musical songs and pop songs is the lyrics. The lyric has to be in character. It has to move the story forward. It can't sit and just be poetic about love in a way that we will happily enjoy and tolerate in a pop song. Musically, you can do almost anything you want, any style. It's about the lyric being part of a play. And if it doesn't become part of the structure of the play, the score doesn't work, and then the play doesn't work.
Michael, can I ask you about some of the work that you've done? There's so many great, amazing productions that you've been a part of. Can I just rattle off a few names and we can go down memory lane?
Sure.
All right. So Sunday in the Park with George won a Pulitzer Prize in 1984. And was that your first Broadway production?
It was. I was 27 when I did it. It's a brilliant piece by Stephen Sondheim. That is many people's favorite because it is about being an artist and why people in the arts do what they do. The show captures it beautifully. I did not know Stephen's work all that well because, as I said, my love of the theater didn't come from knowing theater, came from doing theater. And so I did not realize that because Jonathan Tunick was too busy at the time to do it, I did not realize that I had leapfrogged over every other orchestrator in the business and was working on the best gig one could have in one's career, a Stephen Sondheim show. If I had realized that, it probably would have frozen me up and I would not have done the good work that I did on that show. But luckily, in my ignorance, I went and was as creative as I could be and tried and experimented with things, some of which didn't work and had to be changed, some of which are still there. Some of the writing is inexperienced and is almost unplayable, like the high horn part, which was a horn player's idea, not mine, I might mention. But it was a great experience, and it sort of set my career going. That leapfrog at such a young age. It also means I have a great credit from when I was really young that I have to live with, which is both a good and a bad thing, but I can deal with it.
Now, did you read the book by James Lapine?
No, I hadn't. I sometimes will look at books before I work on musicals, but I've been through the workshop process with the show, and that a show usually takes 4 to 5 years to develop, and they will do readings.
Kidding. Wow.
At least some longer. And so they'll do a workshop where they'll get actors together for a week and teach them the songs and then just stand and perform the show to see what they have. And Sunday had a couple of years of development, so I was not hired as the orchestrator yet, but was second rehearsal pianist. So I had some time to get to know what the piece was and what it was trying to do. So the style of the piece was already in my head, and the choices and what James was doing as a book writer was also part of what excited me about the project.
Now, Michael, did you have an audition, or how did you land the gig? Were they looking at your off-Broadway work and then they said, I like that, and they got you?
Stephen looked at some of my off-Broadway work, but he actually had me audition for this because I had so few credits. And it was James who was pushing me, saying, work with this kid. He's really good. He's creative. And so Stephen, who had just been through a real rough experience on Merrily We Roll Along and was sort of throwing the cards up in the air to have a whole new experience with writing with different collaborators, just wanted change. took a chance on me and had me audition and said, okay, this is good, this isn't good, don't do this. You don't need to help my music. And I sort of figured out what to do to be my creative self and not get in the way of what he was doing as a songwriter, but to enhance what he was doing.
Well, you guys really knocked it out of the park. And then the next year, you were the music director for The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which won the Tony Award for Best Musical. I mean, that's from year to year. That's like 2 knockout punches.
Well, it happens that way sometimes. I mean, that was a great experience because it was one of those shows that started in Central Park, where the public theater does the Shakespeare plays usually, but occasionally they'll put on a musical in the park, usually a new one. The Pirates of Penzance also started in Central Park. So Edwin Drood started in the park. It was a lot of fun. We thought we were just going to do it for those 2-3 weeks in the park. People loved it so much that it got moved to Broadway and ran for, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years. It was a great experience. It was a lot of fun.
What's it like being a music director? That means you're in charge of the whole shebang.
Yes, you're teaching the singers and coaching them, doing some vocal arranging sometimes, writing or suggesting music to the composer for scene changes and lead-ins and lead-outs, or as late orchestrator Michael Gibson used to call them gozintas and gozadas for songs. And it's exciting. And then, you're rehearsing the band, and in performance, you're trying to keep the band and the singers together and follow a production and keep it exciting 8 times a week. That's really difficult to make it consistent enough so dancers and singers get what they expect out of the pit, yet just slightly different enough so that it's exciting and pulls in directions so that people don't get too bored with what they're doing. Now, that show, because it was very light and fun and silly, it was easier to be a little different every night. The show, if you know, it actually stops for the audience to vote on who the killer is in the middle of the second act. So
brilliant.
We could do all sorts of silly things in that show. We had a great time doing it.
I want to actually jump a little bit to animated film. A couple of years later, The Beauty and the Beast, you did the original. You've done the most recent one, and you've also done the original animated one. Could you talk about how you started getting into film now?
Okay, so let me knock off these early Disney credits by saying that I am not the orchestrator of those films. I only worked on about 10 minutes of underscoring music for everything from Beauty all the way through Aladdin and Pocahontas. Those films were all orchestrated by Danny Trube. And again, as I said, the time for orchestrating for large orchestra, all those underscore cues, which you do after the animation. You do the songs before you animate so that the animators can move the mouths of the characters to the singing. So they need the singing before they animate. You do the underscoring between the songs after, so you can imitate all the action and capture the action with the music after animation. So, but all that music after the animation gets recorded pretty quickly. So again, an orchestrator usually reaches out for help. And I knew Alan Menken and had done a little work with him. And so he and Danny asked me to help out on all those early first Menken Disney projects, from Beauty, Aladdin, Pocahontas. And so when they were coming closer and closer together, and so when I do that work helping out, I just sit at my desk at home and do it and hand it in to Danny, who will be the one out in Los Angeles with the orchestra and will make the adjustments in the charts. I'm just helping out. Luckily for me, what happened is those films became closer and closer together. And when Hunchback came up, Danny said, I don't have the time between I think it was between Pocahontas and Hercules were the ones on either on either side. He said, "Why don't you do Hunchback?" And I said, "Sure." So I got one of those to do myself. And so that's the one that really my hands are on, where I did 90% of the scoring and Danny orchestrated 90% of the scoring and all the songs, and Danny orchestrated 10% of the underscore.
What's it like working with Alan Menken?
Alan's great. He's a sweetie. You have to like sushi because he's going to take you out for sushi. He's just great. He generates his piano vocals in Performer. So you get Performer printouts of the music. Things are often to click, though occasionally there's a free time cue. And you get video, early video from Disney so that you're seeing the cue against it. The songs you do without video, of course, because nothing's been animated yet. But he's very open to you being creative and bringing what you want to it, as long as his melody and harmonies are respected and kept what they should be. He's a wonderful writer, prolific.
Then you also worked with him on Tangled. So
right.
I have to ask you, actually, because in theater, you're really seeing the audience reaction immediately. But in film, you're kind of doing it away from the audience, and then you're getting all this feedback, and it's changing kids' lives, and kids are quoting movies and singing the songs. How does that sensation of seeing your work in film reach back to you?
It doesn't really reach back to me. I think it reaches back to Alan some, who feels that this big body of work has affected kids for so much. For me, orchestration is such a much smaller part of a film work that I don't really get affected by anything after my work is done, to be honest. I mean, how audiences react to things, and I want them to like it, so they'll buy tickets. But the moment I'm done, I kind of walk on to the next project and don't really look back. I don't listen to cast albums I made. I don't listen, I come across those tracks occasionally on radio or something, and I'm surprised. One of them I heard and thought, God, who orchestrated this? This isn't the version I did. And it got to the end and it was the version I did. I just had completely forgotten what I had written.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of looking back, because looking back, I also see what I don't like in my work. And that's an education, but it's too late to do anything about it in that project. Sometimes in the earlier projects, it's things I've already learned to not do, but it's already written in stone that I did it on that project 20 years earlier, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, and in the case of cast albums, I think the majority of them are badly mixed and badly produced, to be honest. I don't say that because I can't hear my own work. It's because elements of my work are just completely missing, and usually out of negligence, because they just didn't stop to think and turn them up, or they don't know what a synthesizer can do, so they figure, oh, we'll just leave it out, or the vocals are badly mixed or badly mic'd very often. I did one recording of a show where the miking of the vocals is so awful that you hear them bouncing off the wall of the booth the whole time. Yeah, and it just, at that point, it's like, I don't want to listen to this. So I'd say the majority of the show cast albums I've done, I don't bother listening to. They send me early mixes to listen, and I'll give notes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I'll listen to it to give notes, but then I put it away and put it on my shelf and forget about it.
Now, Michael, I want to jump to Assassins in 2004.
Sure.
And that was your first Tony Award, and you're a Broadway vet by that time. What's that like, winning that Tony? And could you talk about the production of Assassins and the orchestration that you did on that show?
Sure. Assassins, for those in your audience don't know, is a Stephen Sondheim musical about all the American presidential assassins. It's a review in that it's a sort of bunch of scenes that don't make a complete play, but it's about the twisting of the American dream and about these assassins' confusion that they have the right to be happy. And in America, we don't have the right to be happy. We have the right for the pursuit of happiness. And it's about that dark underbelly of America that's angry and in recent years has come out on the surface, we can see. It's told through these historical characters, some of whose stories we really know well, like John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald, many of whom we don't know well, but are really interesting and really fascinating part of history. And Stephen wrote this score that's full of Americana songs of different styles. And so it was a challenge to me. Instead of, Sunday was all French Impressionism and then a little more modern sound for the second act, or two sounds to sort of, for me to find, here's a score that shifted gears on every song in a different direction. So that was a challenge. And we did a workshop of it in 1991 we presented it to the press and it didn't get reviewed well. We didn't orchestrate that version at all. It was just done with a couple of instruments because there was some confusion as to whether the press would be reviewing. And so we then went into the studio and recorded it with a 35-piece orchestra, which of course you could never use on stage. Then the show lay fallow and we were going to produce it in 2001. 9/11 occurred and it was felt that this is not the time for this very, very dark look at America. And so it wasn't until 2004 that a production finally happened. And I reorchestrated because he couldn't use the 35-piece orchestra. So I reorchestrated it for 14. And it was a brilliant production. Joe Mantello directed. And we recorded it, and I got a Tony Award. I'm very proud of that Tony Award. I think part of it is Stevens, because the show had been produced off Broadway and open to the press. It was not eligible to be nominated as a Tony for either revival or maybe it was as a revival, but his score couldn't be nominated because it was not considered a new score. It was a revival score.
Yeah, it won Best Revival of a Musical. That's right.
Right, it did win Best, but Stevens' score could not be nominated. So I always feel that part of my Tony, which I do think I won, but part of my Tony is Stevens because it's for his score, I think. Tony
Awards, I mean, that's like the Oscars basically for or like the Grammys, but it's for Broadway.
The best thing about winning a Tony Award is that you don't have to worry about when will I win a Tony Award. Because it is sort of, it's wonderful to be recognized by your community that you work in. And until you win one, you go like, oh, will I ever get one? And once you win one, you go, all right, I got one. Now I can lose a few times. I don't have to have another. I got to that point.
Can I ask you, Michael, was that something you strived for in your career? Like you said,
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. You strive to have a good show. Awards are, not to knock the awards themselves, but they're kind of meaningless. They're recognition of what you did, but the people in your community recognize the work. There was no orchestration Tony at the time of Sunday in the Park. There was a Drama Desk Award, which I won for Sunday in the Park. But it doesn't matter that I didn't get a Tony for it because everyone recognizes my work and saw what my work is. The people, the general public may not have it in writing that Sunday in the Park won a Tony for orchestration. It doesn't matter. The people in my business know I did it. They know I did good work. They know I did good work on a show 2 years ago. It doesn't, that's what really counts is how you did on the last project and what fun project you have coming up. I won't lie to you or pretend that it doesn't matter that I won Tony Awards. Of course it matters. I mean, you're bringing it up in an interview. People do all the time, but that's not why you're in the business. You're in the business to do great work. And when you do great work, it doesn't matter whether it got the Tony or the Tony nomination. It matters that you did the great work and that you keep doing great work. It's just a little cherry on the sundae. That's a lot of fun. It's great. It's heartwarming, but it's not the reason you're in the business.
Now, let me ask you about the next Tony Award that you won for Next to Normal in 2009.
Right. We should point out that I co-won that
with Tom Kitt, and also Billy Elliot won as well with Martin Coate.
Right. So we had a tie between two shows. Billy Elliot won, tied with us for orchestration, and Tom and I orchestrated that show together. It was our first project together. Tom is an orchestrator. Tom is younger than me. He's in his, I believe, mid-30s. And so his bend is towards the music of his youth. Again, rock and roll, but of a generation later. But he appreciates what I do from my classical bend. And so he wanted someone to bring a little something to what was his first Broadway show, but keep a lot of what he had done with rhythm section in the show, in the workshops for the show. And so that collaboration worked out really well. We did another show together, If Then. We've done a couple of other shows since. I just did Dave, which is playing down in D.C. now. I'm about to do a show with him called Superhero. We've done a lot of work together, and he's still quite active on his own as an orchestrator. I believe Superhero we are co-orchestrating. So there's a wonderful sort of collaboration between us that flexes and changes and goes back and forth, which is a lot of fun. Yeah.
Could you talk about Once on This Island, which you were nominated for this year, that you worked with Anne-Marie Milazzo?
Yeah, that I had done the original production of that back in, I'm going to guess, 86, 87. You can look on my website or on find out. But anyway, so they were doing this revival, which started as an idea between
1990, I think, is the Broadway.
1990. Okay, so probably 89 off Broadway and 1990 Broadway. This production started as an idea between Anne-Marie and the director, Michael Arden. And it was to have Anne-Marie's original idea was to do like an a cappella version of it. And Michael wanted to make it originally like it was a bunch of people around a campfire telling this story to this little girl. And the idea developed, and they sort of realized a cappella wouldn't work, but how can we make the sound more sort of community-based among these singers? And we developed the idea and then brought it to Lynn and Stephen, the authors, who liked it. And I did Michael's idea was that this community was on the beach. Now the final idea was on a beach after a hurricane, and you walk into the theater and the floor of the theater is covered in sand.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's in a theater in the round setting, and with garbage strewn everywhere. And during the half hour before the show starts, the cast is cleaning up the garbage. They have live chickens there.
Oh my God.
In a cage next to someone who's cooking chicken in a pan.
That's amazing. I mean, that's really like getting the audience excited, doing cool things that they won't expect. I mean, that's really brilliant.
Yeah. It's a brilliant production that Michael Arden put together. And I took a orchestration credit with Anne-Marie because her vocal arrangements are such a part of the sound of the show. And I'm weaving the new orchestrations I did just for a 4-piece rhythm section around the sound she did. And we also got this idea to play the garbage. I have a friend named John Bertles with a group, Bash the Trash, that makes instruments out of trash and works with kids in a music education manner to teach them music with these trash instruments. And I had this idea with John to have him develop instruments out of the trash on the ground and have the cast play them. And that's what we do in this. So it's part of the disaster from the hurricane that people are picking up trash and making instruments to tell this story to this little girl.
To end off, I'd like to ask a couple of quick fun questions. Who are your top 3 composers, like classical composers?
I would say Mahler, Debussy, and Stravinsky.
You said you were a Mahlerite. Do you have a favorite symphony?
Oh, that's like asking to have a favorite child.
Oh.
For years, I've said the Sixth because I have about 18 different recordings of it.
And do you have a favorite one of those recordings?
I lean towards Barbaroli, which is very slow but somehow holds it together. But I also, with Mahler, there was a rediscovery for me in the recordings by Boulez. One would never expect Boulez to be a great Mahler conductor, but his Mahler performances, while they don't have the heartbreaking passion that like a Bernstein would have, they're full of beautiful playing, and you hear the work that Mahler is doing. You hear the construction of the symphony. They're beautifully balanced. They're full of beautiful playing, mostly from the Berlin Phil, but I think there's a couple by the Cleveland, and they're just wonderful performances in the digital era that for one, you hear things you thought you'd never heard before.
Now, you're a master orchestrator. I want to ask you, who are your favorite orchestrators?
Living
And maybe passed away as well.
Well, I think, I don't know if John Williams still orchestrates his music, but his composition and the orchestration of his music for film is just brilliant. He also is one of the few people maintaining the old way of melodic and stylistic scoring.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that a lot of the contemporary scoring is just a pad of sound.
More ambient.
Yes, exactly. And his is dramatic still and remains dramatic, yet he flexes his styles. I mean, you think of all the, I mean, I think my favorite score of his is E.T. because it's so, but you think of the brassiness of Star Wars, and then you go to the jazziness he did for the Tintin movie. You go to the 60s flute-based sound he did for Catch Me If You Can. And then one of my favorites of his, because it's so dark and so muted, is the Nixon film. Because it's, first of all, there's a piano solo going always, but it's like a piano recorded from 2 rooms away, which, if you know the fact that Nixon was a very good pianist.
You're right.
Kind of.
Yeah, in fact, I think he composed a concerto, right?
Did he? I didn't know that.
So. I think it's on YouTube. There's a video of him playing his concerto.
Wow, I didn't know that. But so his use of orchestra, so that even if he's not doing the actual orchestration, he's telling people woodwinds here, oboe solo here. He's doing a very detailed short score, I'm sure. And so his use of instrumental color in film is just fabulous. I think Debussy is a lot of people go to Ravel with orchestration. I just come back to Debussy over and over. Ravel, it's perfectly controlled, but the music doesn't move me like it does in Debussy.
He said he's like a Swiss watch, Ravel.
Yeah. And there's so much to be learned there. But I keep coming back to music that really does it for me. And then there's Stravinsky, who I feel like studied with Rimsky and mastered that late Russian sound in those early ballets, and then threw it all away and made up his own style for everything, starting with the right and everything after that. Totally different aesthetic of what orchestration is after that beautiful, full, lush thing. And that, I love that. I mean, that takes balls to do that, to do something so good and so successful and turn away from it and go, I'll do something different now.
Right.
Part of that was money, because, he got past those ballets. I think when he did L'Histoire, that's all they could afford to have. So he was forced to start writing for this smaller chamber sound. And I think that may have been an issue in those days. I don't know. I'm making that up probably.
Top 3 Broadway musicals in your mind. The ones that you've worked on, or things that you've seen. What are your top 3?
I won't do the ones I've worked on, but top 3 outside. Oh my God, it's hard if I take out the ones I did. I think one of my favorite scores is Pacific Overtures. I think Jonathan's orchestration of that is absolutely brilliant. Stephen's writing of it is oh so brilliant. I think I can't do one of Bill Finn's shows because I orchestrated those.
I'd love to. No, you can definitely include the ones you did, because there's some great.
Well,
ones.
I think.
And we're talking the totality of the production too.
Yeah, I'm too close to falsettos to have an opinion, because that's like that's like having an opinion on your adolescence. But I think his show New Brain is a wonderful, wonderful show and wonderful score. I have to say, I worked on it, but Next to Normal is a wonderful, wonderful play and great score to deal with a subject that one would never think musical theater could deal with. And he does it brilliantly. I mean, Sweeney Todd is a brilliant piece of theater. I don't know that I go to the earlier material and find favorites for me there. I admire Oklahoma. I admire things like that, but those are not where my heart is, Well, I might also add one more, which is a show you mentioned at the beginning, Queen of the Mist, a score by Michael John LaChiusa, a play he wrote for someone I work with, Mary Testa, who starred in it, and it's a brilliant show. And I also love another show I did with him recently, First Daughter Suite. We had a great time on that.
Right, 2015 First Daughter Suite, that's right.
Yeah, that's a great show.
Now, my last question for you, Michael, is what advice can you give to a young orchestrator who wants to get good at the business, get good at his or her craft?
Well, my first piece of advice to a young orchestrator is don't do it, because I don't want the competition.
But you might get somebody to help you if a deadline is kind of...
Well, but my next piece of advice, saying if you have to do it, is if you're going to do, and I can only give advice for theater. I do not know how to go out and become a film orchestrator, or what the process is. I know that you have to go out to Los Angeles, not New York, and that's the end of my advice for film orchestration, because I just don't know that, how to get into that business. But I'll tell you, for the theater, is you need to become a music director first, because you need to understand how theater functions, what singers need, what incidental music needs to be written, how vamps work. All the mechanics of theater are best learned in the rehearsal room, in the process. An orchestrator is not sitting there for that. Every one of the successful theater orchestrators I've mentioned has worked as a music director first, has learned how theater functions. That's the way to do it. You have to be a pianist to be a music director, and you have to work in the pits, and you have to work with singers. Once you accomplish all of that, or just find a place to start orchestrating. Orchestrate for a workshop, orchestrate for a small presentation, for somebody's, recording that they're making. But you have to know the theater well, because just knowing how to work with instruments doesn't make you a theater orchestrator at all.
Brilliant advice. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for your experience and coming on the show and sharing all your wonderful anecdotes of all the amazing productions you've been a part of and worked on. Listen, you have a standing offer if you want to come to Singapore. If it gets too cold up there in New York, come on down and you'll have a good time. I promise you.
I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Thank you again so much, and really hope you'll come back. And could you tell us what are you working on this year? And do you have anything that you want to promote? Any show that you're working on?
Sure. I just worked on, as I mentioned earlier, a musical called Dave, which is based on the Kevin Kline movie about a guy who's a double for the president, gets hired to stand in for him one night. During that night, the president has a stroke, and they suddenly push him into being president. It's a musical by Thomas Meehan, Tom Kitt, and Nell Benjamin. And we just did it in D.C. where it's still playing. I hope that's going to be coming in this year. I have another Tom Kitt musical coming up called Superhero, written by Tom and John Logan. And then I'm about to do a show by Carmel Dean, her first musical. She's someone who's been music directing in New York for a couple of years. And this is a musical about the poet and the St. Vincent Millay. And in this case, the lyrics are all Millay's poetry. Yeah, so it's some fun work coming up.
Michael, thank you so much for being on the show, and it was a pleasure to talk to you today. I'm so honored to have you on the show.
Oh, same here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Take care.
Okay, thank you.